Cool. All right, it's 1 o'clock, so we will get started. I'm Lisa, and I'm one of the naturopaths here at the Paediatric Naturopath, and I'm not the skin specialist on the team. So the two skin specialists on the team are Summer and Sarah. So they are joining us today, and they'll be talking about the nitty-gritty things. Um, but I say ask questions as we go along, type them into the chat, or just ask them at the end, whatever suits you. This is being recorded as well, just as an FYI. So thank you. It's lovely to see so many people joining live. And I'll just open up the chat and just say hello, pop your questions here. So we all know where to go for that. Cool. So we're going to be talking about eczema and the root causes of eczema that if you go and see a GP or a dermatologist, you may not actually get around to talking about some of the root causes of eczema, and that's what we're trying to uncover for you today. So this is the team at the Paediatric Naturopath. So as you can see, Sarah on the left here, she is joining us today. This is Amy. She's another one of our naturopaths and nutritionists. That she focuses more on brain health. So ADHD, developmental concerns, speech delay, aggression, anxiety, all those sorts of things. Then we have Summer, who is also one of our eczema specialists, me, and this is Sarah, different Sarah, who does fussy eating, and Celine, our dietitian, who also focuses on fussy eating. So today we're going to be talking about why eczema isn't just a skin issue, the core causes, what a holistic treatment approach is. We'll be sharing some real life success stories, or we're going to be giving you some information on what to do for your next steps if this is something that you want to investigate more for your child. And I think it's always really helpful to see feedback from other parents who have worked with us. So this is actually someone who worked with me, and what they said was Lisa helped us with our son's eczema. She gave us advice on diet and supplements and what was causing the flares. And it made such a difference to his skin. But the beauty of naturopathy and nutrition is you might come to see us because your child has bad eczema, but the changes that we make by optimizing diet, by optimizing lifestyle, by correcting nutrition deficiencies, by addressing gut health, when we do all of those things, we don't just fix the skin, but we can fix mood, sleep, behavior, all sorts of different things. So you go in with the target of eczema, but you end up helping a whole lot of other things. So I'm going to hand over to Summer to explain why eczema is not just a skin issue.
Thanks, Lisa. So, yeah, like Lisa said, eczema is not just a skin issue, it's a whole body condition that reflects what's happening beneath the surface. So we need to appreciate that the skin is like a sign on the surface of what's going wrong underneath. So these internal imbalances. We can think of eczema like an iceberg, with the tip of that iceberg as the visible part, those skin symptoms we're seeing in eczema. And underneath the surface, we can have a whole range of things potentially going on. We might see issues with the gut, so imbalanced gut bacteria, or what is termed gut dysbiosis may be there. So an imbalanced gut bacteria environment is generally, simply put, is potentially not enough of the good guys and too many of the not so good guys there. We might see immune dysregulation. So in eczema, the immune system often overreacts to harmless substances like food, pollen, gut pathogens, or even skin microbes. There might be nutrient deficiencies, which we'll cover a little bit later. There's environmental stresses like household cleaners, personal products, fragrances, molds, plastic, heavy metals. These stresses can burden detox pathways and increase inflammation, again, showing up as skin flare-ups. So healing eczema means looking under the surface, looking at all of these things that potentially may be going on, and not just managing the symptoms on top. So we'll move to the next page, Lisa, and we'll have a bit of a chat about what most people are offered when they see the GP for their child's eczema, and that would be steroid creams. So steroids are commonly prescribed for eczema, but they're not the long-term solution. Steroids work by suppressing the immune system in the skin to reduce the redness, the swelling, and the itching. They can provide short-term relief during a flare, but they're not designed to address what's actually causing the eczema. So steroid creams do not heal or rebuild the skin barrier. They don't identify or eliminate triggers, be it food or things in the environment. They don't restore a healthy gut microbiome. They don't address an overactive immune system. They don't remove these toxins and stressors in our environment. They don't improve nutrient deficiencies. So while they may calm the skin for now, the underlying cause remains, and flares often come back. And a lot of people find themselves in this frustrating loop where flare happens, the steroid cream is used, the flare will calm down for a little while, but then it will just start up again, sometimes come back worse, so that go back to the GP recommends a stronger steroid cream. So they get stuck in this cycle. There are long-term risks associated with steroid use. Sorry, there are risks associated with long-term steroid use, and especially use of the strong steroid creams. They can thin the skin, so the skin becomes very fragile. Kids can become resistant, so they end up on stronger steroid creams. There can be topical steroid withdrawal, especially if it's been for a long time. So while steroids may help, as we've just seen, they're not really getting to the cause. They're not getting to the roots of the problem. So let's look at what's actually contributing to eczema, and I'll hand this over to Sarah.
Unmute, Sarah.
Thanks, Summer. So you heard from Summer just before about the long list of things that can, make eczema worse or cause an irritation and trigger eczema flares. So it probably seems a little bit overwhelming, just sort of knowing where to start. So it's helpful, I think, to look at the 4 different areas, and we call these the 4 kind of core causes of eczema, and kind of look at them and also think about them in terms of they're all working together. So they're not sort of independent of each other, and they're very, very linked. So that is the genetic component of eczema, the microbiome component of eczema, then the fact that there is always a skin barrier issue, and the likelihood of food intolerances or allergies. So one of the first things people will always ask when they come to see us is, I'm not sure what's causing my child's flare. I think it could be dairy or soy or wheat. And it's kind of, they're sort of going around in a bit of a merry-go-round, not really knowing where to start and what is causing the issue. And yes, it's very common that there will be some kind of food allergen or intolerance. And that's because eczema is an immune dysregulation. The whole sort of, there's a lot of immune dysregulation going on. So food intolerances are definitely part of that. And one of the other things that it's also helpful to think about is that eczema itself can actually cause food intolerances. So that's often things that we see when kids have eczema really early on, so before they start solids introduction, that can also predispose to food allergies and intolerances. And one of the things that happens often is that a recent patient of mine, her child was reacting to a lot of different things, and he was about 6 months old when he came to see me. And we were just really trying to put the puzzle pieces together and figure out exactly what was causing those food reactions. There was a lot of immune dysregulation going on in the background. But when they did the IgE skin prick test, it came back with coconut as one of the foods. And coconut had been on our list because she had been actually applying coconut oil before 6 months before he'd ever had any coconut products. And that's because eczema comes with a really weakened skin barrier. So anytime you're putting things on the skin, it's more likely to go into the blood, and that sort of early sensitization can lead to food allergies and intolerances. But we do find that cutting out foods can be confusing for parents, and a lot of the time, some foods shouldn't be getting eliminated. Sometimes there's a lot of foods getting eliminated, and we really try to narrow that down as much as possible. There is some idea that is more of a historical concept where parents would remove a lot of foods like during breastfeeding and during pregnancy and then also breastfeeding. And that's found to actually not be of benefit. So one of our key strategies is to help parents bring back as many foods as possible, especially during breastfeeding, because that can also help with the immune tolerance later on. And a big part of the food intolerance issue is gut maturation. So looking at how we can support the gut and support that gut maturation process is usually has much more impact than just taking a food out of the diet. So that brings us to genetic issues. And I was just talking a bit about the skin barrier and why that is, how that can also cause food allergies. So with kids with eczema, you'll often know for yourselves that there's usually a family predisposition to allergies. So often, someone will have hay fever or asthma even, or definitely very commonly eczema as well. And so a lot of kids with eczema will have genetic mutations that affect their skin barrier. Not all of them, but the skin barrier issue is the genetic mutation for filaggrin is really commonly associated with the earlier onset eczema. So if you're seeing your child having eczema from birth or really early on in the piece, that can definitely be a sign that their filaggrin is not working as well. But there's a whole bunch of other genes that can also be predisposing to eczema. So that can be genes that cause more inflammation, or genes that also make it harder to process nutrients. So one thing that's also helpful to consider is, because a lot of the time parents will say, oh, my child's eating a lot of vegetables, a lot of fruit, vitamin D levels look fine, everything looks fine, but the eczema is still really bad. And so you start to wonder about what other things are going on in the genetics that might be contributing to that. So a normal amount of vitamin D is not necessarily enough for certain kids, especially if they have genetic issues with the way they respond to vitamin D, for example. And the same goes for quite a few other nutrients as well.
So I'm just going to jump in and just see what the question is. So the first question is, and Sarah, I'll let you answer this. To check for food intolerances, is the skin prick test the best way to go? And if so, what age can you look into this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a lot of it sort of depends on the person and the process that you're going through, because the earlier you do the skin prick test, the more likely there is to be false negatives or false positives. But it can be a helpful thing, and it will be guided by your allergist usually, because that is a process that you go through with an allergist. So that's usually a slightly different process. What we normally do is elimination and reintroduction protocols as part of that. Usually it's a combination of either skin prick testing, sometimes a blood test looking at total IgE levels and some food panels, and then also looking at a food diary and and doing some kind of food elimination or reintroduction.
Yeah. And with the IgG blood test that we do sometimes do, you have to be 2 for that to be accurate. So you definitely wouldn't want to be doing that, the IgG one, before 2. And the next question, what gene testing company do you use? Well, it depends. So my favorite gene testing company is Smart DNA, but the cost of that one I think is around 440, but it is very nicely displayed information and very easy to understand. Then we will also sometimes use the Naturopath gene testing, which is cheaper. I think it's about 250. But the report just isn't as easy to manipulate. So that's what we use for that. So 2 very good questions. So I think that was it for this page. Sarah, I'll change the next page. Is that okay?
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so just talked about filaggrin, which is a protein that makes up part of the skin barrier. And obviously a lot of kids will have an issue with filaggrin. Skin barrier issues, there can be other proteins involved as well. And it is very much a genetic kind of process that will usually make the skin barrier function worse. However, there is, like with the filaggrin, that's the protein that makes up the skin barrier, that can also be down-regulated a little bit when there's a lot of inflammation in the system. So if your child's getting a lot of colds and flus, or they've had a lot of reactions to vaccines or anything like that, that can also just naturally downregulate barrier function. And that's why we often see kids having flare-ups after colds and flus or severe infections. They'll have a major flare-up. And they might not have a genetic issue with filaggrin, but it's just that the skin barrier isn't working that well because of the inflammation in the body. And so when the skin barrier isn't working well, what we see is quite a lot higher amounts of staph, which is quite a potentially problematic bacteria. Usually there is a little bit of staph on the skin, but there's other bacteria to balance it out. But in eczema, you're seeing a lot more staph, and you're also seeing more of like an alkaline skin, which essentially means that there's more ability for irritants to go into that skin. There's more water loss, so it's drier, itchier, and also there's more potential for secondary infections. So, for example, your child comes home with impetigo. If they have eczema, it's more likely to get more serious or more complicated, and that can also lead to obviously more antibiotics and things like that. So, essentially, what you're trying to do with a child with eczema is really build up their skin barrier in all of the different ways that you can. And that will involve a number of things. So judicious use of emollients. So definitely there is some benefit to emollients. It will also depend on the child though, and it will depend on the location of the eczema because moisture and heat can sometimes also make eczema worse. So I think you have to take a really adaptive approach with skin barrier care, depending on the site of the eczema, the nature of the eczema, and also the season and what else is triggering it. But essentially, you are using emollients, barrier creams. We also use specific herbal tea baths to help with barrier function, antioxidants, and also to help clear excess staph. So there's a few different treatments that you can do to support that skin barrier, and obviously a lot that you can do internally as well. And that will also depend on what the child is looking like they need from a genetic point of view as well, what they seem to be just needing more of. So there's a whole lot of things that go into building up that skin barrier function.
Cool. So a few more questions. So it's a good example of actually what you mean by this, and maybe I'll let Summer answer this one. So for a 5-month-old exclusively breastfed baby, how do you start to identify potential food intolerances?
So, good question. I would start with looking at the mum's diet, looking at a bit of a history from birth moving forward oftentimes for really clear identification of food intolerance. I often see kids who have not been breastfed for really long, for very long, and they get introduced to formula. And generally it is a dairy formula. Dairy can be one of those big foods that a child can be reacting to. But the question was breastfed, wasn't it, Lisa?
Exclusively breastfed baby, yeah.
Baby. It would depend on the severity of the eczema. And again, the mum's diet, doing a bit of a diary. I generally look at the big ones first, and that would be dairy, wheat, and egg, but would be hesitant in pulling out too many foods other than that, given that, as Sarah stated, keeping foods in the mum's diet who's breastfeeding is a really important aspect in promoting immune tolerance of those foods. Whenever we do remove foods, it is only for a very short time, and generally removal of those foods for about 3 weeks give us a really clear indication if that food is adding to the eczema or not.
And we don't just send you off on your own and say, cut out eggs, cut out dairy, cut out wheat. We have a 100-page diet guide with 3 weeks or 2 weeks of multiple meals per day. So you don't walk away going, I can't eat anything. You actually get given this lovely recipe book of all the different foods that you can eat. And sometimes, it just forces you also to change the habit. So you might have been eating peanut butter on toast for breakfast for the last 4 years. And so whenever you go through a process like this, it challenges you to think of other foods that you could be eating that might be more nutritious or just giving more diversity into your diet. So we do support you all the way with that. Now, next question is, if a client is using steroid ointments, what is the best way to support the skin barrier alongside this? So Summer, I'll get you to answer that one as well.
So really definitely looking at giving an emollient beside that, or if there is a need, again, depending on the severity of the eczema and what it's looking like. You can have so many different types of eczema. It can be just dry and irritated. It can be hive-like, covering the whole body. The other extreme, it can be red, weeping, and looking very infected. Depending on what it looks like, we may be using an emollient. On top of that, there would be a cream with anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial activity to help settle the skin down. Generally, I use that in combination with the steroid. And a lot of people find that with time, those creams added in, they no longer reach for that steroid as often, or needing to use as much steroid cream as they were when they first started with me.
So they get to taper off.
Tapering off. And it depends on the potency of the steroid in terms of trying to look towards a tapering schedule as well. So really need to be careful with that. But I sometimes get quite surprised that recently, last week, I had a client on quite a potent steroid. The plan was not to come off steroids. It was just to add in the creams along with some other strategies. 4 weeks later, Mum was like, oh, yeah, we stopped steroids. No problem. I'm like, whoa, that was great.
Yeah.
I always need to be a bit hesitant because we don't want rebound flares occurring and making things worse and potentially opening up for infections to occur. But yes.
Yeah.
Bringing in those extra things, whatever it is, creams or herbal tea baths, helping the skin calm down, and generally you'll find that the steroids can be tapered down quite easily.
So the next 2 questions, I'll answer those. So about the specific emollients that we recommend. So Whenever you look at kind of the eczema cream markets, you'll see there's a lot of the more natural ones, which look great. And then when you actually drill down to what's in them, they contain food-based ingredients. So, as Sarah said, if you get exposed to a food through your skin before you get exposed through your gut, you can actually predispose the child to an allergy. So, Sarah just mentioned where she's seen it with coconut, and I've seen it with tallow. So, I've seen it where a child's been slathered in tallow from birth, and come 6 months, they're actually allergic to beef. So, that's kind of the natural emollients have that inherent risk in them. And then you have the non-natural ones, which are just really, really full of chemicals and also not things that we want to apply to our baby's skin. So we make our own because we can make it organic. We just have a couple of ingredients in it. They're natural ingredients, but they're not food-based ingredients. So that's where we have landed with the best, and we do get great results in that. So that is something that we currently supply to customers, but in the near future, it will be more widely available on the website as well. So stay tuned for that. So Marley has asked, how long does it take for food and mum's diet to cause a flare-up in a breastfed baby? So Summer, I'm going to get you to answer that one as well.
So again, it comes down to what kind of immune reaction that infant is having. You will see pretty quick reactions after a feed if the child does have an IgE allergy. It gets a little bit more difficult when that immune reaction is more delayed. And Lisa briefly mentioned that as an IgG allergy. This is where food diaries come really handy to help us identify what kind of reaction that could be. So you're looking at post-feed within a couple of hours. If it is an immediate reaction, otherwise it would be more delayed, and it can be up to 36 hours later.
Yeah. So Laura has asked, and I'll get Sarah to answer this. Laura has asked, so if a baby has been on steroid cream for facial eczema, do you recommend natural creams to control the flares?
Yeah, so similar to what Summer has said, we will always taper off any creams. Generally, that would definitely be our goal to come off steroid creams because of the thinning of the skin long term. It depends on the child and how severe it is, because obviously when it's very, very severe, we do want to manage it. And it is, yeah, once again, a tapering off process. Um, and it will also depend on the baby's age as well. So I normally use a combination of a barrier cream, an emollient, and then using steroid creams less and less, and doing all the background work as well to kind of minimize those flares. And that the combination of things really helps. It's never just a matter of changing a cream. You'll never really get much of a result with that if that sort of inner work isn't being looked at.
Yeah. And then another one for you, Sarah, from CC. What is the best way to differentiate if it's fungal, bacterial, staph, etc., and then specific herbs for each?
Oh, okay. Yep. So, um, with the differentiation of skin issues, it can be a little bit tricky. There are some key things to look for. So in terms of fungal bacteria, I mean, the staph is usually a component of any kind of infection because, especially with eczema, because it is usually in quite a dominating species. So you can have, for example, impetigo, which is a different bacteria, or molluscum or something like that. Oh, and sometimes there's a couple of different things. Usually look for the type of lesion and the appearance. So there are some very clear kind of things that we look for. Um, with a fungal kind of infection, that can also be a little bit harder. Sometimes it does involve a trip to the doctor to kind of get a bit of a swab, especially working over the internet. We can often see what's going on, but we'll often send you for a swab or some kind of skin test if we're not sure. You can also tell based on, if there's impetigo going through your house, or if your siblings have something, then it's likely that the baby has caught that. So just kind of getting a bit of a history and then potentially just looking at how it's appearing and or getting a skin sample taken.
Yeah. Cool.
Hopefully that answered the question. Oh, there was a second part to
Oh
that.
yeah, sorry.
The herbs.
Oh, the herbs, yeah, what herb? It was
Yeah.
clearly I would say it's a naturopath asking the question, the herbs.
Yes, yeah. So depending on the infection, so very commonly we deal with fungal infections, impetigo, molluscum, and we look at the research to say like what's going to clear the impetigo faster. We use a certain percentage of tea tree oil for impetigo, but that also depends on the nature of the person's skin. So we have to kind of modify that sometimes, but that has been shown to be incredibly effective. And then we use lemon myrtle for molluscum is very effective. Fungal infections, we use a range of different antifungals. I'd probably say we use Nigella a lot. Um, we use Golden Seal a little bit as well. Pau d'Arco as well. So it just, yeah, there's a few that we use, but we try to just go for ones that we know will be very effective and they usually clear everything up quite quickly.
Yeah. And I think we've gone through this slide already. Is there anything else you want to add to this slide?
Um, yes, yeah, I think I've covered that.
Yeah.
Those
The
points.
microbiome.
Yeah, so just kind of reflecting on that question earlier about the breastfeeding, exclusively breastfeeding mom, having issues with food, potential food issues. Um, we always look at the sequence of events that have led to a child's microbiome development and the maturation process so far. So sometimes people will think to themselves, "Oh, I had a cesarean, so I must have created really bad bacteria," or there's always these ideas that that things have gone a bit awry. But generally, with the gut maturation, with the microbiome maturation process, if there has been disturbances to that, there will be less tolerance to foods, and sometimes that's not immediately evident from appearances. Perhaps, birth was fine and breastfeeding okay, but sometimes it can be from mum's gut flora passing over to bubs. So sometimes there can be a bit of a disturbance there. But essentially, with the gut maturation process, we're looking for ebbs and flows, and those ebbs and flows are actually what creates immune regulation and tolerance. And there's quite a few things that will actually impact that. So the main ones that we see in practice, but it's not just one, like we never just see one, like you wouldn't say, oh, cesarean birth, for example, that isn't the case. But if, for example, there's like the mum's gut health is a bit like microbiome is a little bit disordered. And then there has been a lot of antibiotics during birth, and then also a lot of not much breastfeeding and formula, like early formula. Then those can be some of the things that really impact that ebb and flow. So, but it's never just one thing. And especially if you're bringing in breast milk um, into that environment, that can really make up for a lot of, potential issues because the breast milk is quite responsive to what the baby needs. But I guess my point is that a lot of things can lead into the gut being more reactive and sending signals that kind of cause more inflammation in the skin. But we kind of look at the whole history and see where that is playing in so that we can help to um, modify that and help the child to tolerate more food and have less skin reactions from that kind of right from the gut. Um, One of the things that people will often notice is that after antibiotics, their child's eczema flares up. So that's just a really common example of how important the gut microbiome is in terms of that immune regulation and how much it does affect the skin. Other medications that can also affect the microbiome are Panadol. So if you're giving a lot of Panadol during teething, or if your child's had a course of reflux medication, that can also make the way for more problematic bacteria to come in, and they can just be very inflammatory. So this is the kind of the area that we really look at, especially if your child has any signs of gut issues, so constipation, loose stools, distension, or if they're complaining of gut issue, like sorry, gut pain. We really focus on this part of the process as well. And one really good example of how much the gut health affects the skin is we had a set of twins that we were treating, and so obviously they're coming from the same house, same birth, same kind of, early introduction of foods. And then we ended up doing a gut test, and one of them had very low diversity compared to the other, and that child actually had much worse skin than the other one. So it just was a really great example of how gut diversity and how things that impact the gut will have an effect later on with the skin health.
Yeah. So Ali has asked about the impact of mold, heavy metals, and environmental factors. So we're going to cover that later on. So we'll hold that. And then next question from Renee. When is the child's microbiome fully established? So diversity gets up to adult. So diversity is basically the number of different bacteria you have in your gut. The more, the better. I mean, ideal, like perfect sort of level is about 220, I think. We would never see someone with that. And when you're a baby, it's, 2. So by the time a child is about 4 or 5, their diversity is at adults level. So you can compare kind of adults diversity scores to children's diversity scores, but up until that, it will be lower. And of course, we see extremely fussy eaters. And broadly speaking, diversity in your diet leads to diversity in your gut. So we're seeing the children who are eating 2, 3, 4, 5 foods. So obviously their diversity is usually quite limited because of that. And then Sarah, this is just back to your first page. Like the same chart again. Anything to add there?
Oh, I guess I was just going to sort of summarize and say, you just never look at the one thing because there's always going to be, the gut's always going to be affecting how well kids can tolerate foods. It's going to be affecting how well the skin barrier is working, and the genetics are going to be playing a part in there as well. And then also that skin barrier issues can be part of the driver for food irritation. So, looking at how you can introduce solids safely and sort of that early kind of life is really important as well.
Yeah. And so the next question is, what is the youngest age you test the gut microbiome at? So generally speaking, the gut test that we use in Australia, it doesn't provide pediatric reference ranges with it. But because we've done hundreds and hundreds of them, we now understand the different markers and how they change at different age groups. So the youngest age, I think, Sarah, you probably did the youngest one in the last few weeks. What age was that baby that you did?
I think he was 5 months old.
Which would be the youngest that we've done. And you would definitely hesitate and think, oh, is it wise to at such a young age? But to be honest, the results that we got back for that child were, oh my God, this was such a good investment because it showed some, it showed some issues that we now know exactly what we're dealing with, and we would not have known that without doing that microbiome test. But you definitely need to, you can't just work with adult naturopath to do that because the reference ranges provided by the companies are not reflective of pediatric ranges. So you need to have specialism in that. So now we're going to talk about some other contributing factors. We're going to start with environmental toxins. So this will cover off the question that we had. But things that we look at are things like detergents and cleaning products, because the whole point of surfactant is just, it's another word for detergent, basically. The whole point of a surfactant is to break apart oil and water, so you can clean your dishes. So if you put that on your skin, you are stripping the skin barrier of oil. It's always a question that we get asked a lot, and it's very important to kind of minimize the use rather than trying to find the best detergent and the best cleaning products. You can also just minimize, because whenever you wash your clothes and these things, the residues are left on the sheets, on your clothes, and that can cause that permanent irritation. So a great app to look at, or a great Instagram to look at, is A Glimpse of Amelia. And she has an app that you can actually use to choose some of these things. But we also supply information and handouts on how to choose this. I've seen a lot of people who are on laundry products that are very high in essential oils. And even that's just been too much of a burden for the child's skin and has been quite triggering for them. Now, mold, there is no end to the damage that mold can do. So in some people it will cause brain fog, and some people it will cause respiratory issues. And then in some people it will be linked to eczema. So some mold you can see, and mold in bathrooms I mean, who doesn't have a little bit of mold in their bathrooms? But it's mold when it sort of spreads throughout the house is a bigger issue, but you can't see it. So sometimes you need to think, have I had a water leak in my roof? When last did I have my aircon cleaned? Is there a bit of a funky smell in here? And you may need to get a building biologist in to actually properly assess your home. And then we've got good old plastics and endocrine disruptors. So about the time that my first baby was born, about 17 years ago, BPA was just kind of the latest and greatest. Oh my God, we need BPA-free bottles. So what happened was overnight, they took the BPA out of bottles and they replaced it with BPB because nobody knew anything about BPB. There's no results on it, there's no testing done it, but it calmed down people's fears because now everything said BPA free. And it just had BPB, which probably has the exact same problems. So the easiest thing is just to avoid plastics in general. So that's in bottles, packaging, toys, skincare. So always choose glass. So if you are bottle feeding, choose glass bottles. Choose a stainless steel water bottle and stainless steel lunch boxes, and even stainless steel plates and cups. You can often get them in camping shops. And so that will reduce that overall load. So I see there is a question, so let me just see what the question is. What microbiome test do we use? We use Cobiome. Always Cobiome, because it's the most up-to-date technology when it comes to microbiome analysis. What gut microbiome markers can indicate mold exposure? So definitively, you cannot assess mold exposure on a gut microbiome test. However, we do see extremely low pancreatic elastase on children who have been exposed to mold. That would be the main one that I would look at. I know on another gut test that we used to use, they do have a marker called rhodotorula, which is a type of yeast, which is also very associated with mold, but that's, I don't believe that is looked for on a cobiome. But if you really want to know, you do a urine test for mold exposure. So then nutrient deficiencies. So of course, our children often have diets that are limited in the very nutrient dense foods, plus the foods that are grown in Australia today are inherently nutrient deficient because a lot of the nutrients have been used up in the soil. Spraying with all the chemicals reduces nutrients. And one of the most common deficiencies that we see is zinc. And it's also one of my favorite nutrients to give because it can have such profound impact on so many things. So you need zinc for skin healing and for your immune system. So as we've talked about, having an impaired skin barrier and having a aberrant immune function are very important factors in eczema. If you can look at your child's nails, and if they've got lots of white spots or kind of big white spots, then they may have a zinc deficiency. If they're a fussy eater, I would pretty much guarantee they have a zinc deficiency. And if they're sick all winter, they also probably have a zinc deficiency. The next one is vitamin A, which is deficient in pretty much everybody's diet because we used to get a lot of vitamin A from liver, kidneys, all the organ meats are very high in vitamin A. So like cod liver oil, that's very high in vitamin A. Those sort of the tail to nose to tail eating, does not really happen anymore. So we're not eating the foods that are high in vitamin A. We might eat foods that are high in beta carotene, like sweet potato and carrots, but we need to convert that to vitamin A in our body, which sometimes doesn't happen so well. So vitamin A is good for skin, good for immune response, good for anything where there's a barrier. So, up your nose lining, in your gut lining, it's very important. And then another deficiency is omega-3 fatty acids. And it's an outright deficiency in omega-3 fatty acids because we're not eating enough fish, but it's also the imbalance between omega-6 and omega-3. So omega-6 is very high in processed foods, and then you get an imbalance. So many children may need a fish oil supplement or something like an evening primrose oil, or maybe they just need to eat more fish, but it has to be small fish, not big fish, because if you're eating big fish, then you run into the heavy metal issue. So you're thinking about like sardines are a great one. So you need these nutrients to basically build the healthy skin. And if you are on a journey of eliminating lots and lots of foods, you can very quickly end up deficient in even more. Let's see what the questions are. What is the reference range for pediatric elastase? So it's the same as for adults. So I don't know, it sounds like you may have done a microbiome test and you will see that kind of over 200 is classified as okay, but over 200 is not good enough. You really want to be about 750, so at the top of the range. So in an ideal world, your child would be at 750. For kids that I've seen who I know have been mold exposed, and I know that mold is a big part of their story, their pancreatic elastase might be 50, 60, 70, things like that. So Marley asks, at what age can zinc be given as a supplement? Already on vitamin D, cod liver oil, and probiotics at 5 months old. So zinc will be at its lowest level at about 6 months when the stores that children are born with are used up. But I wouldn't rush to give a zinc supplement. I would rush to get them onto meat. A lot of people think that you have to like leave meat to kind of, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 months, but I would bring in small amounts of meat soon after starting solids to try and build up the zinc and iron stores. So sleep. Eczema is often worse at nighttime. So kids get into bed and they start to itch and scratch and you're kind of subconsciously itching, so you make it even worse and you can break the skin and cause infections. So if we can improve sleep, we can help reduce the flares and then help the healing. And children with eczema also have more stress in their life because they have that constant irritation. And if it's, if they're out and about at preschool and school, they could have some social issues with their skin as well. And then the stress will pump up their cortisol and their histamine, which make eczema worse. So if we can support sleep and reduce stress, it can have a big impact on eczema. And you also need to look at the sleeping environment. So if they have a dust mite allergy, they hop into bed every night, the dust mites go wild with the heat and the moisture, and then that can trigger it. Or if there's mold in their bedroom, even like mold in their mattress, mold sort of in their carpets, and then they get into bed at night and they're constantly exposed to mold, that's going to make things worse as well. So just a question on the tallow. Have I actually seen beef allergies as a reduce of tallow use? Yes, I have. So I can't hand on heart say that the tallow caused the beef allergy, but I'd never actually seen a beef allergy in a child before. And this is a few years ago, so tallow was only really starting to be used. And because there was a very strong family history of eczema in the family, they were trying to be very proactive and using tallow as an emollient right from the get-go. And by the time he was 6, 7 months. He was so allergic to beef that he would touch beef and his hands would go hives. So, he'd pick up the piece of meat and his hands would get hives. So that's why we definitely shy away from using tallow or any food-based ingredients. And then just the chronic immune activation. So, I mean, the most common gut parasite that we see is threadworms. I'm sure lots of people listening today are dealing with chronic threadworm infections. If you are, I have a podcast, Holistic Health for Happy Kids, and one of the first episodes of that is called The Itchy Truth, and it's all about threadworms and what to do with it. But it can lead to skin symptoms, it can lead to itchiness, restlessness, mood swings. And of course, because it has such a big impact on sleep, then you get into the vicious cycle that I described earlier of poor sleep, stress, a vicious cycle. A good way to check if your child has worms is the next time there's a full moon, which I'm not quite sure of the date, but it might be about 10 days from now. When they're asleep, go in with a torch and have a look at their anus and see if anybody waves back at you and have a look. Because worms will be more active at the full moon because they're a living thing. So you can check for that, and then you can treat the threadworms and potentially improve the eczema. Some of the clues that your child might have threadworms is the anal itching, but anal itching is only present in 50% of children who have worms. So you definitely can't go by that. Sometimes the first time that people find out that their child has worms is when they get their appendix removed, and the appendix comes out and they look at it under a microscope and it's chock full of worms, and the people had no idea. And then we've got the chronic viruses like Epstein-Barr, CMV, and any herpes family viruses, which can, your child maybe got sick at one point and then got better, but then they have this virus just living in their body, which will reactivate under stressful conditions or reactivate if they're exposed to mold, for instance. And, this can contribute to eczema flares as well. So this is, let me see another question. Next full moon is the 9th of August. Thank you. Yes. So have a look and let me know. So this is what we do in our 5-step eczema recovery plan to help you move away from that steroid sort of roundabout. So we look at the root causes. So we look at the things that we've talked about. We look at symptom patterns, environmental triggers, and there are some testing that we can do at this stage. So we can test your microbiome, which is just a poo sample. We can test your hair to look at nutrient deficiencies and toxicities. So that's the HTMA. Or we might do some food reaction testing. And then we put together a nutrition plan targeted for your child. So rather than, just going to iHerb and buying everything that has eczema in the title, we can work out what your child is actually deficient in and what they really need to address any deficiencies. We also heal the gut and calm down the immune system, again, using child-friendly ways to do that. So remember, at the Paediatric Naturopath, we deal with kids like 95% of the time. So the supplements and the tools that we use are targeted for kids. So we don't prescribe supplements that children can't and won't take. We prescribe supplements that are generally very well accepted. In terms of skin barrier, as I said, we make our own natural skincare that does not have food items in it. So that will support the skin barrier. And then we also have lots of information on low tox swaps for the bath, for laundry, for other household things. And the beauty of nutrition naturopathy is that we look at the child as an entirety. We're not just looking at their skin like a dermatologist would. We're looking at everything. We're looking at their stress levels. We're looking at infections. We're looking at their nervous system and treating them holistically. And that's why naturopathy gets the best results. So we are only 5 minutes to the end. We've had lots of great questions, which is wonderful. I'm just going to keep answering the questions because I think that's really important. If avoiding all food-derived oils and creams, what is best to use for general moisturizing a healthy newborn or infant, or do you avoid altogether? So I'll let Sarah answer it, but in my opinion, it depends on whether you need to use anything or not. But Sarah, what do you think?
Yeah, exactly the same. If the skin is quite smooth and not extremely dry, I would just avoid all topical things. But obviously, if there is a need for moisturizer, I usually go for shea butter as my as the thing that I use. It's just one ingredient. You will sometimes see things online about it being potentially a food well, cross-reacting with tree nuts, but that hasn't been what's been supported in the literature or our experience, clinically. But sometimes, like I actually had someone this morning who is having great results with shea butter for her. He's 9 months old now, um, but her allergist had said, oh, avoid shea butter because we're not sure about it. And so there is like a bit of alarmist sort of thing about shea butter. But she was just sort of saying to me, he'd sort of said to go back on the dermies. And every time she put the dermies on, it would give him hives. But because he'd kind of put this sort of bit of fear in her, the shea butter's working beautifully. But she wasn't really sure what to do in that situation. So you will sometimes see things about shea butter, but that's what I tend to prefer and normally what I recommend. It will depend on the child, though. Obviously, that isn't a stock standard approach, and you always should patch test everything. But that's what I usually get really good results with in the early, before 6 months. It's a great option.
Yeah. So for a 2-year-old, would a HTMA test be more ideal over blood testing for compliance? So a HTMA won't tell us two very important things. So it won't tell us if your child has celiac disease, and it won't tell you your child's vitamin D level. Other than that, HTMA gives us a very, very broad range of information. And it depends if you're game to do a blood test. So if you're game to do a blood test for your 2-year-old, I would do both. I would do the HTMA to look for most minerals and toxicities, but I would also do a blood test to look for things like celiac disease, vitamin D, and also IgE reactions to things like dust mites, pollen, things like that. Um, I will just answer one last question. Well, actually, I'll get Summer to answer one last question. So, Renee asked, do you find salicylate intolerance common in eczema presentations?
Good question. So salicylates, for anybody who doesn't know, is a natural food chemical, high in a lot of really healthy foods. Um, in my experience, I find histamines are more of an issue over salicylates. So I'm trying to think back. I don't think I have seen a child with a salicylate intolerance presenting with eczema. Can be associated with other kind of rashy type things or skin flushing. But no, I have not seen a child with salicylate intolerance.
So I'm unfortunately just going to have to skim over these wonderful case studies that Summer has put together. But what I would recommend you do is watch the replay of this and just pause the screen at these pages so you can read through this, because it gives you a really good idea of what the issue was, what Summer did, and then what the outcome was. So obviously positive outcomes. Because I want to get a chance to share with you kind of what to do next if this sort of approach does appeal to you. So as of today, we're launching a program, an eczema recovery program, which includes 4 one-on-one consultations over 12 weeks, personalized nutrition and skin support for your child. We guide you on supplements and also testing if you choose to do it. So things like the microbiome test or the hair test or food intolerance test. We've got lots of great resources, things like Sarah said about the seasonal guide. So we've got a seasonal guide to eczema. We've got lots of information about how to choose things like detergents and other things to use around the home. You also get 2 acute appointments included, so 2 short appointments. Because what we find is that as you're going through the healing journey for your child, things pop up. There are not kind of a full 30 minutes appointments worth, but just some quick questions like, oh my God, this happened and now my child's skin is doing X, Y, and Z. So we include 2 short appointments for you to use. We've also got a closed Facebook group, which has the benefit of you can pop in there any day and ask questions, but you also get to learn from other people's experience and other people's questions as they ask. So you might have a question about peppermint ice cream, and you go in there and you find that somebody else has already asked the question. And then we send you a welcome gift pack, which has a safe for eczema soap, a good for eczema probiotic, and also the eczema emollient that we've talked about today. We actually send you 100 grams of that so you can get started with that straight away. This is the QR code to scan to sign up for that program. Hopefully that works. I'm trying to be very technologically advanced and sometimes that goes backwards. But if you do want to join the program and you're pretty sure that this is for you, you can, if you sign up before the 5th of August, you get $50 off using this code eczema50. And although we didn't have time to go through the case studies today, if you actually hop on to Google, you'll see lots of great reviews about eczema. So just, will we see an 8-year-old? Yes, we will see an 8-year-old. Anyone up to 18, we will see for eczema. So thank you very much for all the wonderful questions. It makes for a
Sorry, Lisa.
missing part.
I just noticed another question. I don't know if Sadie's question got answered. How can we best support the, did you answer that?
No. How do we best support the immune response when food sensitivities are the culprit? So I would say you just remove them in the short term whilst you work on gut health to then reintroduce them as soon as possible. Summer and Sarah, would you agree with that as a abbreviated version? Great,
Yeah.
great,
Yeah,
great.
and there's also some herbs and specific nutrients that they might need more amounts of that can really help with immune regulation as well. So we can kind of, create a program that's specifically for them that helps with that.
Yeah. So thank you very, very much for everybody who's joined live today. And thank you very, very much to Summer and Sarah for the in-depth eczema knowledge that I do not possess. So that's great. And feel free to email me, admin@thepediatricnaturopath.com.au, or you can contact me via Instagram as well. And yeah, any questions, just shoot them through. But thank you very much for joining.